Being in jail gives you plenty of time to reflect on your own stupidity. Yet I thought of nothing but hatred. Hatred for my boss, my soon-to-be ex-wife Carol, and most of all, hatred for myself for being so damn blind. My name is Michael Arnold, and when I say I was stupid, I mean stupid with a capital S. I was stupid like an ignorant husband who had no idea his wife was cheating on him, and with the person I despised most in life, my boss Jacob Sanders. I was also stupid because I didn't know her pregnancy resulted from their affair. I, the clueless idiot, thought the child was mine. I guess my wife's pregnancy is what led to her saying, "Honey, we need to talk." I should explain how this all began. My troubles with Jacob Sanders actually started in first grade. We've been enemies ever since he made fun of my freckles, triggering our first fight. The teacher pulled us apart. I had a broken nose, and he had a black eye. During our first 8 years of school, Jacob and I averaged about 3 fights a year, with third grade being the worst at 7 fights. But in 8th grade, we only fought once because I beat him so badly. I wanted nothing to do with Jacob and tried to avoid him, but he wouldn't leave me alone. For some reason, he was jealous and constantly tried to outdo me. He worked to get better grades in every class. He excelled in science and literature, while I was stronger in math and history. In other subjects, we were about equal. Jacob was decent at sports, but I was slightly better. If I played any sport, Jacob would do the same and try to beat me. The fighting stopped after 8th grade when Jacob realized he couldn't win physically. Instead, he started trying to embarrass me or get me into trouble. He nearly got me expelled and arrested in high school. During sophomore year, someone broke into the school and spray-painted graffiti in the hallways. The authorities found my student ID next to an empty spray can in a dumpster. The only thing that saved me was that I'd reported my ID missing the day before. I knew Jacob took it because I once saw him walk away from my locker after practice while I was showering. I checked everything in my locker and noticed my ID was gone, so I immediately reported it to the office. Another time, Jacob brought a fart toy to class. He placed it on my table and activated it. When the sound echoed through the classroom, Jacob held his nose and said, "Mike, what did you have for lunch?" The class laughed, but I countered with, "Whoever smelled it, dealt it." The class erupted in laughter again, prompting our teacher, Miss Wormwood, to warn us both about detention if we continued disrupting class. Being laughed at and reprimanded infuriated Jacob. He blushed brightly but stayed quiet. Beyond his attempts to get me expelled or arrested, Jacob's mischief was mostly just annoying. I didn't really care whether he was better than me or not. Apart from typical teenage insecurities, I was comfortable being myself. However, there was one area that really mattered to me: girls. We were both good-looking, but Jacob's wealthy family gave him an advantage with the girls at school. In 11th grade, he had his own car, not some old junker. His parents bought him a $50,000 BMW Z4. How could I compete with that? Still, I was attractive enough to get my share of dates. Jacob dated cheerleaders and girls from the popular crowd, who I figured were out of my league anyway. But he wasn't satisfied with my occasional success. If I dated a girl more than once, Jacob would swoop in and start dating her. It never took long for her to dump me. For the most part, I didn't care. I wasn't in a committed relationship with any of these girls, so if they wanted to date Jacob, fine by me. Yet there was one girl I really liked. Sandy Springer. She was smart, funny, and pretty. When I started dating her, I took her to distant places, so Jacob wouldn't know I was interested. After a couple months of dating, we decided to be exclusive. I thought if Sandy wore my ring, I was safe. Remember I mentioned I am stupid? Well, in this case, I was too. Prom was approaching, and I just assumed Sandy and I would go together. I should have asked her right away, but I am not sure it would have helped. After buying tickets, I mentioned it to Sandy over lunch. She blushed and said she'd accepted Jacob's invitation. I demanded my ring back, then left Sandy crying in the cafeteria. I never spoke to her again. I was so angry at Sandy that I wanted to rip someone's head off. Instead, I spotted Pam Taylor, captain of the cheerleading team and Jacob's supposed girlfriend. Under normal circumstances, I would never have approached her. "Hi, Pam," I said cheerfully. "How are you doing?" "I am doing well." "How about you, Michael?" Pam answered. She was great, never arrogant. "I am doing well," I said, figuring I had nothing to lose. "Tell me, would you like to go to prom with me?" "It is very nice of you to ask," she said kindly, "but I am going with Jacob." "Oh, I must have misunderstood." I feigned ignorance. "I just heard Jacob invited Sandy Springer. I must have mixed something up." "Yay. Forget I said anything. I am sure I misheard." I left Pam flustered and talking to herself. Later I heard they had a big fight. Jacob may have stolen Sandy from me, but I'd ruined his romance with Pam. It wasn't entirely satisfying, but better than nothing. That day things improved dramatically. "Michael." Pam called out as I left school. "Hi, Pam." I continued to feign innocence. "Stop talking nonsense, Michael." Pam's eyes narrowed. "I found out you were in a relationship with Sandy, and that creep Jacob stole your girlfriend." My ears burned. I'd been caught. "Yes, I am sorry. I was just trying to get back at Jacob. I am sorry you got caught in the crossfire." "Were you serious about taking me to prom?" "It doesn't matter," I began to say. "Never mind." "Yes, I would be delighted if I could accompany you to prom." "Good, because I want revenge too," Pam said. "And if you play your cards right, it can be a very memorable night." The prom was incredible. Not only did I take the most beautiful girl in school, but I made her feel like a princess. Pam was amazing. I enjoyed the expressions on the other guys' faces. I couldn't believe she was with me. I don't know what Jacob expected, but it definitely wasn't his girlfriend going out with me. His eyes nearly popped out when he saw us enter the gym. All night he tried to get between us, asking Pam to dance repeatedly, but she wouldn't give him the time of day. I felt sorry for Sandy because she realized Jacob was just using her. She finally stopped crying and had her parents pick her up. I still feel awkward about it even now. But she made her choice and had to live with it. After prom, Jacob kept trying to get Pam away from me. I was smart enough to know I was playing Cinderella, and by tomorrow Pam would probably be back with Jacob. But tonight I was going to enjoy every moment, which led me to a local motel where I spent time with the most beautiful girl in school. When I dropped Pam off, she gave me a big kiss and told me what a great guy I was. I went home floating on a cloud. As expected. By Monday, Pam and Jacob were a couple again. Still, I smirked at Jacob whenever he passed me in the hallways. Graduation arrived, and most of us headed off to college. I was sad to leave my hometown and afraid of the unknown, but not sad to leave Jacob forever. Or so, I thought. I was accepted to Georgia Tech while Jacob attended Harvard. Of course he went to Harvard. There was even a building named after his grandfather. I did well at Georgia Tech, majoring in software engineering. I met Carol at a party during my first year. I won't bore you with how we became friends, fell in love, and got married. To be honest, I think at first we were more like really good friends than true lovers. None of that matters now anyway. Carol was smart, studying business at the University of Georgia. I liked her because she was not only intelligent but also funny and very friendly. However, Carol wasn't strikingly beautiful. She was pretty in a girl next door way. Truth be told, Carol couldn't hold a candle to Pam, but she was about as pretty as Sandy. For some reason, we hit it off right away. We married 3 months after graduating, and in our 5 years of marriage, I thought we were happy, despite being more friends than lovers. By our 3rd year together, I was head over heels in love with Carol, and I think she felt the same. We even talked about starting a family. Little did I know that my wife had already started without me. Right after school, I got a job at Zaba, a security software startup. I graduated at the top of my class, so I had my choice of jobs. The 2 brothers who founded Zaba sold me on joining at the ground floor to make a fortune. Don't get me wrong, the company did well. The firm prospered, doing quality work for several large companies, and I earned a 6-figure salary. Our job was finding and fixing security holes in client software. Our reputation grew, but then the brothers decided to cash out. To my surprise, we were acquired by a company about our size. And that is when my problems began. About 3 years after I started at Zaba, Carol wanted a new job. It happened that Zaba was looking for an office manager, so Carol applied and was hired. I was a little worried about us both working for the same company, but everything worked out fine at first. We rode to work together and had lunch together. We worked in completely different departments, so we rarely saw each other during the day. We'd arrive together, kiss goodbye, and go to our departments. If we were both free, which was most days, we'd have lunch together and drive home at the end of the day. Everything worked well until it all went wrong. Before I tell you about the acquisition, let me tell you about my department. I was a senior programmer, which meant I worked on projects myself and managed the work schedule of 8 other programmers who reported to me. My main responsibility was fixing problems my team couldn't handle. Luckily, there weren't many, which meant our customers were very happy. Our workspace was about half the size of a basketball court. We called it the bullpen, and mostly worked standing at tables. The room was filled with computers, servers, interfaces, and printers. Almost all the equipment we could dream of. We took pride in making our clients' systems as secure as possible. In my 5 years with the company, we'd had only one complaint where a client's system was hacked, but we traced it to an employee who had disabled most of our software. The employee wasn't very smart, but he really gave us a sleepless night. Besides the 9 of us, we had an administrative assistant, Kimberly. She was our girl Friday, preparing correspondence, keeping track of supplies, and making sure we never ran out of anything. Kimberly also prepared monthly statements and tracked billing. Interestingly, most of our work was initially done with pencil and paper, giving programmers an overview before typing anything into the computer. Somehow Kimberly could decipher everyone's handwriting and type notes for our files, and though it wasn't in her job description, she made the best coffee every morning. Kimberly was about 23 or 24, with short blonde hair, deep brown eyes, and a very pretty face, but she was about 50 pounds overweight. Considering she was only 5'5", this was a lot of extra weight. Despite her pretty face, her size immediately affected her appearance. I knew Kimberly was sensitive about her weight because she often mentioned how fat she was. I felt embarrassed whenever she did this, but I knew it was just her defense mechanism. All I cared about was that Kimberly was excellent at her job and an asset to my team. The news that Zaba was being sold came like a bolt from the blue. The 2 Zaba brothers didn't even have the courage to tell employees in person. They had their lawyer make the announcement. I was furious because all the stock options they'd promised when we went public vanished with the announcement. I didn't know how to handle this change. Carol was just as upset and confused as I was, but she convinced me to stay until we saw what the new owners would do. They sent a senior vice president to oversee the transition, focusing first on the main office. When I joined, Zaba had grown from 5 to more than 150 employees. I heard the VP from corporate headquarters would start in accounting, then work through the entire company. Not even 2 days later, I learned that the VP reviewing Zaba's security software was none other than Jacob Sanders. At the same time, I learned our pay would be aligned with the parent company. My salary would increase by $35,000 and Carol's by $15,000. My internal alarm was screaming for me to run, but Carol convinced me it would be foolish to leave, especially after the salary increase. She pointed out that Jacob would only be there for 6 months at most. Then he'd be gone. The first change came when 4 new programmers were hired and assigned to the bullpen. Sure, they were all Harvard graduates, but none were a tenth as good as anyone on my existing team. Not only were they poor programmers, but they were arrogant with an inflated sense of entitlement. All 4 immediately started harassing Kimberly, sometimes privately, sometimes openly mean. I advised them that their behavior was unacceptable, but they didn't stop. They just harassed Kimberly when they thought I wasn't around. Finally, I called all 4 into the conference room and gave them a stern warning. They offered empty apologies, but I could tell they wouldn't stop. Beyond their treatment of Kimberly, all 4 were difficult. Nobody on my team liked them, and they caused more harm than good with their work. Eventually, I decided I wanted them gone, but I didn't have the authority to fire them since Jacob hired them. I knew if I asked him to fire them, he'd simply ignore me. I noticed Kimberly arrived early every day to make coffee and prepare the office. Since I'd scolded the 4 troublemakers, they'd all started coming in earlier too. I realized they were using this time to torment her. I knew Kimberly was close to quitting, but she loved working at Zaba and needed the job. I decided to arrive early and catch them. Hidden in a supply cabinet near our small kitchen, I kept my phone ready to record. As expected, Kimberly arrived and started making coffee. A few minutes later, the 4 arrived and the harassment began. "Hey Euler, Ted, The gang leader grinned at Kimberly. "Show us your secret place." "Fred," another added. "I want to see you." "Yes," said the other two in agreement. I saw tears rolling down Kimberly's face and couldn't take it anymore. I had enough evidence, so I emerged from the closet. "You four, pack your things and leave." "You are done," I said. "You don't have the authority to fire us," Fred retorted. "Mr. Sanders hired us, and said only he could fire us." "True," I said with a nasty smile. "However, I have evidence that you harassed Kimberly. So here are your options. Either resign immediately or I turn this video over to the police. I'll give you 15 minutes to decide. You can even run to Jacob if you want, but I am sure he won't stick his neck out to protect scum like you." 15 minutes later, I had all 4 resignations, and they were gone. Kimberly's face showed immense relief and gratitude. I called her to my desk after they left. "I apologize for what these 4 put you through. I should have acted sooner. If anything like this ever happens again, promise you'll come to me immediately. You are a wonderful person, and these 4 are just scum." Kimberly sobbed softly and thanked me for protecting her. I told her it was part of my job, but I hadn't done it well, so she suffered too long. "Mr. Arnold, you have no idea how much this means to me," she said, holding back tears. "I was going to quit, but I didn't know what I'd do without this job. I didn't know if I could find another position this good." "Again, Kimberly, I am so sorry you had to endure this. I can see you are upset. If you want to take the rest of the day off, I'll make sure it doesn't count toward your personal or sick days." "Thank you, Mr. Arnold, but I'd rather stay here at work." After that day, Kimberly seemed to do everything she could for me. I kept insisting I was just doing my job, and not very well, considering what she'd endured. Of course, Jacob called me into his office as soon as he learned I'd forced his programmers to resign. "I want those programmers hired again," he demanded as I entered. "That won't happen," I said firmly. "I have evidence that they harassed our department's administrative assistant. If you want to hire them back, go ahead, but I guarantee a lawsuit will be filed against all 4 of them, the parent company. And you, I don't think your bosses would appreciate that." Jacob glared at me but then smiled and relented. Carol came home and attacked me for being antagonistic to Jacob. She thought I was a jerk for threatening our boss. At that moment, I should have realized what Jacob was up to. My gut was screaming danger, but when everything returned to normal at home, I brushed off the incident. At the end of the day, I still believed Carol loved only me. If I'd listened to my intuition, I might not be in prison now. But I was stupid and allowed Jacob and my wife to lull me into a false sense of security. 2 months after the merger, nothing had changed between Carol and me. I learned that the company that acquired us was called Software. They were about our size, but mostly had government contracts. Zaba gave them entry into the commercial market. No, Jacob's father didn't own the company. His family's fortune came from the pipe and electrical wiring industry, but his father sold the business while Jacob was still in college. I could say many negative things about Jacob, but I couldn't call him incompetent. He did an excellent job, merging the 2 companies. He even convinced the board to keep the Zaba name because it had a better reputation. What I didn't know was that Jacob had completed the merger in just 8 weeks. After that, he fully focused on seducing my gullible wife. Just like with Sandy in high school, Jacob won over Carol despite my warnings. She seemed fascinated by him and constantly praised the job he was doing. I kept warning her about Jacob, but she just accused me of jealousy. 4 months into the transition, Carol announced she was pregnant. I was ecstatic, though our intimate life was suffering. From 3 times a week down to once every 2 weeks. I attributed this to her pregnancy. Then our lunches together stopped, and finally Carol started going to work separately. The culmination came when Carol stopped me one morning before I left for work. I was surprised to find her still at home, since lately she'd been leaving at least an hour before me. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, motioning for me to sit on the couch. I sat down, confused about what was so important. What Carol told me shattered my world. "I am sorry to tell you this," Carol said, with a hard look in her eyes, "but I've fallen in love with Jacob, and he has fallen in love with me." I just stared at her for a long time, studying her face. I realized she had no regrets. Finally, I exploded. "Are you out of your mind? I told you Jacob is an opportunist who would try to drive a wedge between us. I can't believe you fell for his act. He is not an opportunist. Carol flushed. He is a kind and loving man. He understands me in a way you never did. I felt my soul breaking with every word. At this point, I was desperate. So I played my last card. What about our unborn child? I asked quietly. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The baby isn't yours, Carol said with a forced smile. I was stunned. That is a lie. No, it is true. We didn't have intimacy for 2 weeks when I got pregnant, Carol explained. Now I was beside myself with rage. You lying. You slept with that piece of... This is my body, and I can do whatever I want with it, she shouted. Devastation doesn't begin to describe what I felt, but my father once advised me never to show a woman she'd hurt you. Maintaining my composure was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I managed to restrain myself and even forced a grin. You said Jacob understands you in a way I never did, I said with a laugh. You are right. He understands that you are stupid and gullible. You deserve each other. He is a jerk, and you are a Michael. Carol raged. No, this will never happen again, I said calmly. Just so you know, I am not moving out of this house. We'll see about that. Carol turned and headed to the bedroom. What a nightmare. Learning my wife had been cheating with Jacob was too much to bear. I wanted to hit her, but I couldn't bring myself to strike a woman. Jacob, on the other hand, I had no qualms about. I cried all the way to work, but eventually pulled myself together. Actually, that is a lie. I was filled with pure rage. I decided to resign and beat Jacob senseless. Not necessarily in that order. I ran into Jacob as he walked through the company's front door. He didn't seem alarmed to see me and even grinned. I realized Carol had likely dropped her bombshell without consulting Jacob. She was very independent. Jacob probably intended to hide their affair until the baby was born, then take both my wife and newborn child at once. This would be his ultimate victory over me. Rage consumed me as I approached him. He kept grinning, and at that moment I exploded. I punched him in the nose, then the mouth. I delivered 2 hard blows to his groin, and as he started to fall, I landed an uppercut. I left him curled up in front of the door as security rushed to help. I later learned he'd lost 3 teeth and suffered a broken nose. He also had a ruptured testicle. I didn't escape unscathed either. I broke 2 fingers on my left hand. I headed to the bullpen and began packing my personal belongings. Kimberly saw me and looked worried. What happened? She asked with genuine concern. Jacob slept with my wife behind my back, and now she is leaving me for him. I just beat him up, so I guess I am fired. Even if I don't get fired, I'll quit, I explained. My team was shocked, but also worried about their own futures. I assured them my actions wouldn't affect their jobs. Once they were reassured, I returned to packing. But I never finished because the police arrived and arrested me. I expected this, but was surprised it happened so quickly. Once handcuffed, I asked Kimberly to gather the rest of my belongings and take them home with her. After being processed, I was allowed to make a phone call, but I didn't know who to call. My parents were on a cruise 2,000 miles away in San Diego, while I lived in Nashville. I certainly wasn't calling Carol. I decided to call Kimberly, hoping she could find me a lawyer, but the receptionist said she was gone for the day. After that, I just sat in my cell, alternating between rage and wondering how I could win Carol back. One thought kept circling: how could Carol betray me so coldly? Then thoughts of revenge overshadowed everything else. As I sat in jail, I realized Jacob probably had a plan all along. He didn't expect the beating he received, but I am convinced he anticipated. I'd attack him once I discovered the betrayal. Just not when and where I did. Around 4 p.m., I was brought before a judge to face charges. Since I had no lawyer, I was assigned a public defender who looked like a teenager with bad skin. He seemed to know nothing about my case and fumbled through the file until the judge grew impatient. Lawyer, will your client plead guilty or not guilty? The judge barked. When my attorney looked at me like a deer in headlights, I intervened and firmly stated, not guilty. Bail is set at $25,000 cash or bond, the judge said. I carried almost no cash and no checkbook. Sorry, Your Honor, but I don't have much cash and don't carry blank checks. Is there a way I could contact a bail bondsman? My secretary will help you with this and inform you of your court date, he said. But before he could finish, I heard a voice behind me. "I'll post bail for him," Kimberly said, waving a checkbook. I was stunned to see her in the courtroom and touched that she cared enough to help. "I'll repay you as soon as I can get to an ATM," I assured her. "I am not worried about it," she said quietly, looking at my swollen hand. "Is it very painful?" "In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't compare to Carol's betrayal." "Boss," Kimberly said, looking me in the eyes, "I think your wife is very stupid. She made a huge mistake, trading you for Jacob." "Thank you. That is very kind," I replied, smiling at my administrative assistant. At that moment, a young man appeared. "Are you Michael Arnold?" When I confirmed, he handed me an envelope. "You've been served." I shouldn't have been surprised, but the speed with which I received the divorce papers confirmed Jacob and Carol had been planning this for some time. It was another blow to my heart. "Let's get something to eat after I withdraw some cash from the ATM," I said dejectedly. However, when I tried to access my account, I was denied. I called the bank and learned all my accounts were frozen pending court review. I also found my other savings account frozen and my credit cards canceled. A quick check of my wallet revealed I had only $126 plus a $100 bill tucked into a fold. Apparently, Carol and Jacob had frozen all my money. "I am not sure what I'll do, but at least I can buy you dinner," I told Kimberly. "No, it is not like that," Kimberly protested. "Come to my house and I'll cook dinner for us." I liked her suggestion. It didn't make sense to spend what little money I had on dining out. We stopped at Zaba to get my car, and I followed Kimberly to her apartment. I couldn't believe how helpful this woman, just a work colleague, was being. I intended to repay her every cent, and more once I sorted out my finances. At dinner, I was deeply depressed, not only from the betrayal, but because my two broken fingers throbbed. I'd put ice on them at Kimberly's, but they still hurt. After watching me wince in pain, Kimberly finally offered a Percocet she had from a root canal. Within half an hour, the pain subsided significantly. "I still can't believe they did this to me," I complained. "I am completely screwed. I can't even think about getting revenge on Jacob or Carol right now because it would definitely backfire. But someday, I'll pay those two back in full." "Mr. Arnold," Kimberly said softly. "Please call me Michael," I insisted. "I am not your boss anymore. And after what you did for me today, you are a very good friend." Kimberly smiled and continued. "Michael, my mother cheated on my father and left him for another man. I had to live with her, and I hated every minute of it. Her lover wasn't faithful either, just like Jacob. He was never married to my mother, but they lived together for 10 years before he left her for someone younger. My father was bitter and tried to get revenge for many years. He was imprisoned several times and eventually died a broken man. Don't waste your life trying to get revenge." In the end, my father told me he regretted letting my mother's betrayal destroy him. He wished he'd just moved on. Today, my mom lives alone in a nursing home, struggling with respiratory problems from years of smoking. I visit her weekly, though I still don't like her much, and every time I have to listen to her regret leaving my father. So please, don't waste your life seeking revenge. I told her she was probably right, though at that moment I had no intention of letting these betrayers off the hook. The anger still bubbled beneath the surface, and I wanted justice. After helping with the dishes, I told Kimberly I needed to find a cheap motel. Her reaction was immediate. "No, you don't have to do that. You can stay here. I have a spare bedroom, and you are welcome to it," Kimberly offered. "Kimberly, you are the only ray of sunshine in the hell that is now my life. I can't impose on you anymore." "First, this isn't an imposition," she insisted. "Second, if you stay here, I can go to work tomorrow and find out what is happening." Again, Kimberly made more sense than I did, so I accepted her invitation. The next morning, Kimberly called to tell me I'd been fired. She instructed me to email HR requesting they send my final check to her address. When I mentioned the court had frozen my accounts, Kimberly clarified, "The court order only applies to bank accounts. Submit the letter quickly before Jacob or Carol realize what you are doing." I followed her advice and received confirmation. I'd get a check for $4,255.57. The HR department was still checking state law to determine if they had to pay for unused vacation or sick leave. As it turned out, they didn't. But getting nearly $5,000 was a significant win. When Kimberly returned home, she reported that Jacob was absent that day, but Carol was there, and furious with me for beating up her boyfriend. For some reason, this amused both Kimberly and me. I decided to stay at Kimberly's until I received my check. Meanwhile, I updated my resume and began job hunting. I quickly discovered that Jacob and Carol had blacklisted me. Since I worked in cybersecurity, no company would take a chance on someone with pending criminal charges. When my check arrived, I gave it to Kimberly to deposit in her account. I didn't want to risk opening a new account, only to have it frozen too. When I told Kimberly I would stop bothering her and get my own place, she objected. Kimberly pointed out that I probably couldn't even rent a place without a checking account, and my credit score likely showed financial trouble. "Listen, please just stay here until you get a new job," she urged. "In the meantime, you can find a lawyer." I eventually agreed. The lawyer I hired cost $2,000. But it was money well spent. He immediately petitioned the court to grant me access to a reasonable amount from our accounts. The court allowed me enough to maintain a minimal lifestyle, including paying my lawyer. After 8 days at Kimberly's, I found an apartment in her complex and paid the deposit. That Saturday, Kimberly helped me buy minimal furniture for my new place. I also invited her to dinner, which I promised to pay for. Kimberly wanted to go to Olive Garden, which I also enjoyed. As we ate, I studied her more closely. She had the face of an angel, but her extra weight detracted from that beauty, and I could tell she was self-conscious about it. Then I had an idea I hoped wouldn't offend her. "I just discovered there is a gym in our complex," I said casually. "I'd like to use it, but would really prefer having someone to go with. Would you be interested?" "Do you really want to be seen with me?" she asked, gesturing to her body. "Yes, I do," I said readily, "unless you'd prefer not to be seen with a potential criminal." My comment achieved exactly the reaction I wanted. Kimberly didn't want to go to the gym because she was embarrassed about her body, but she didn't want to offend me, so she agreed. We decided to go 4 times weekly at 6 a.m. when no one else would be there. After the first week, Kimberly realized she didn't need to feel embarrassed and began enjoying our sessions. I kept looking for work, but no cybersecurity company would hire me until my case was resolved. My lawyer said there was a good chance I'd be found guilty of assault, but he had a strategy. He suggested that if I claimed to have entered a blind rage over my boss and wife's infidelity, it might be a mitigating factor. And if I couldn't remember what actually happened, the court would have to consider that too. On the day of my trial, Kimberly took time off work to support me, which I deeply appreciated. When my lawyer learned Judge Parker would preside, he advised me to request a bench trial, letting the judge decide rather than a jury. My lawyer explained this would please the judge, and besides, Judge Parker despised cheaters. The prosecutor presented 3 witnesses to the alleged attack. They described what they saw and heard, but under cross-examination, all admitted they didn't see how the fight started, or hear me threaten Jacob. They couldn't even state definitively that Jacob didn't throw the first punch. Jacob then testified, detailing what he called an unprovoked attack. He emphasized that he didn't throw a single punch and listed his injuries. When my lawyer asked about his relationship with my wife, Jacob lied and said they were just friends. When asked about the child Carol was carrying, he claimed that as far as he knew, it was mine. After testifying, Jacob grinned at me before returning to his seat. I was the only witness my lawyer called. He simply asked me to describe what happened that day leading up to the incident, and what I remembered about it. I explained how my wife had blindsided me that morning by telling me she was divorcing me to marry my boss. I was devastated when she told me the child I thought was mine was actually Jacob's. I explained that she was the love of my life, but she'd tossed me aside like an old pair of shoes. I told the judge that I remembered seeing Jacob at the door smirking at me. After that, I lied and said I didn't remember anything until I was at my desk packing my things. The prosecutor tried to confuse me about my memories, pressing me on the timeline. The truth was, I was so furious that I had no clear sense of time. The more he questioned me and tried to pin me to specific times and actions, the more obvious it became that I genuinely couldn't recall. He then asked if I really expected the court to believe I had no memory of the attack. I told him that on the way to work, I'd had a severe headache and saw flashes of light, which was actually true. I repeated that all I remembered was Jacob smirking at me. When asked if I knew for certain the child my wife was carrying was Jacob's, I replied that I could only tell him what my wife had said. Carol didn't appear in court because no one had subpoenaed her. My lawyer told me he considered my wife a wild card he didn't want to risk. I suspect the prosecutor felt the same way. After I finished, the judge retired to his chambers but returned just 10 minutes later. "It is clear to me," said Judge Parker, "that Mr. Arnold was betrayed in the most cowardly and shameful manner. I believe this shock to his nervous system resulted in a serious mental disorder. I believe Mr. Arnold was temporarily insane, and therefore find him not guilty." "This is outrageous," Jacob roared from his seat before Judge Parker brought down his gavel forcefully, threatening to hold Jacob in contempt of court. The sight of Jacob flushed with anger gave me satisfaction. His victory over me had just suffered a small setback. I still wanted revenge badly, but having just avoided jail time, I needed to put those thoughts aside for now. Besides, I had no idea how to retaliate against either of them. Jacob waited for me outside the courtroom. I considered provoking him to attack me, but wasn't sure how that would play out. So I simply called the bailiff. "I shouldn't be within 500 feet of this man, but he is blocking my exit." The bailiff looked at Jacob and told him to move on. Jacob shouted over his shoulder, "This isn't over. I'll sue you." This worried me, so I asked my lawyer, "Can he sue me?" "Enyon can sue anyone," he said with a smile. "But his case is weak. If you want to undermine him completely, don't admit to anything beyond offering to pay for his medical expenses that weren't covered by insurance." So that is exactly what I did in a letter to his office. Jacob never responded or filed a lawsuit. It had been just over 9 weeks since Carol's devastating news. Although I was still seething with anger, my court victory lifted my spirits slightly, so I decided to invite Kimberly to dinner. I also had exciting news to share. At this point, let me be clear, my story won't follow the usual script. I've read many similar stories about betrayed husbands who start their own businesses, become fabulously wealthy, and watch their ex-wives realize they made a huge mistake. That is not me. I am just a worker bee. A good one, but still just a worker bee. Kimberly. And I agreed to meet at a small Italian restaurant. She had to work late because things weren't going well in my old department. Nothing serious, just adjusting to my absence. When she arrived, she looked wonderful. Kimberly was still overweight, but she'd obviously lost weight, and her dress suited her perfectly. I stood up and kissed her cheek. "Wow, you look wonderful." "You've lost weight, haven't you?" Kimberly beamed. "Yes, I've lost 16 pounds. Sorry I didn't notice earlier, but you've been wearing those oversized sweatshirts and sweatpants anyway. Like I said, you look wonderful." The restaurant was small and cozy, exactly the kind of place couples would choose for a date. But I didn't think of it as a date, just a meeting between close friends. "I asked you to dinner tonight because I wanted to celebrate my victory in court, and I have some news. I got a job." "That is wonderful," Kimberly beamed. "Who will you be working for?" "Sable Security from Jacksonville, Florida," I replied. "I didn't know they had an office here," Kimberly said worriedly. "They don't. I'll have to move to Jacksonville." I was completely surprised when the light went out in Kimberly's eyes and tears started running down her cheeks. "I thought you'd be happy for me," I said, confused. "I am happy you got a job," Kimberly said, still crying, "but you'll be 600 miles away." "Kimberly, remember how you told me not to let my wife's betrayal consume me with hatred?" She nodded. "Now I realize the only way I can do that is to put some distance between me and Carol and let time do the rest." "I understand," Kimberly said, wiping her eyes. "I am just going to miss you. I really enjoyed having a friend." "Hey, I am just a phone call away," I said, trying unsuccessfully to cheer her up. I was truly surprised by Kimberly's reaction. Then it occurred to me that she probably didn't have many friends, so I made another suggestion. "You could come visit me if you want. I don't know what Jacksonville has to offer, but I'll find out." "Do you really want me to visit?" she asked. "Of course," I said quickly. "Remember, I won't have any friends there either." "When are you leaving?" I'll start packing in another 5 days, but before then, I have a lot to do. I need to find somewhere to live, open a new checking account at a bank there. I also have to take a polygraph test, get fingerprinted, and pass a drug test. I figure it will take at least 2 trips to get it all done. After this, her mood improved somewhat, but I noticed Kimberly barely ate. I thought she was still upset. In fact, as my departure date approached, Kimberly grew sadder every day. She seemed to be hoping for something more between us. This confused me because I felt Kimberly could do much better than me. I spent my last night before heading to my new job at Kimberly's apartment. She prepared a delicious dinner topped with a chocolate cake with, "I'll miss you" written on it. After helping her clean up, we watched television until bedtime. I pecked her on the lips before heading to the guest room. Her breathing became erratic, and I knew she was close to climax, though I was doing very little. When I was spent, I held Kimberly while she sobbed. I worried I'd hurt her or that she was angry I'd taken advantage of her. "What is wrong, Kimberly?" I asked, almost panicking. "Did I hurt you?" "No, I am just so happy," Kimberly said, resting her head on my chest. "I've been with 5 or 6 men before, but this is the first time I've made love. Thank you." We lay there for several long minutes before Kimberly slipped out of bed. She took 2 steps toward the door, then came back. She leaned over and kissed me. "Will you sleep with me in my bed tonight?" I was happy to oblige, if for no other reason than my bed was soaking wet. Besides, being in bed with Kimberly seemed the perfect way to spend my last night in the city. I've never seen such pure pleasure and tenderness on anyone's face as I saw on Kimberly's that morning. Afterward, we showered together, and I realized Kimberly was well on her way to becoming a knockout. She was already out of my league, but I would cherish this night forever. After breakfast, I checked my car one last time to ensure I had everything, then turned to Kimberly and kissed her. She responded with perhaps the most passionate kiss I'd ever received. Unfortunately, it was time for me to leave. As my car pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Kimberly sit down on the curb. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob. I desperately didn't want to leave her, but I knew it was for the best. I was still in love with Carol and therefore damaged goods. Oddly enough, I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore, just feeling a profound sadness in my heart. Jacksonville was fascinating, but I didn't see much of it. I threw myself into my new job, working long hours not only to stay busy but because it helped me forget Carol. I kept in touch with Kimberly, who always seemed excited to hear from me and sad when our calls ended. From her, I heard the news I'd been dreading. Carol and Jacob got married about a month after our divorce was finalized. I also learned Carol had given birth to a baby girl. Strangely, this news didn't bother me as much as I expected. Perhaps I was beginning to recover from the pain and humiliation. I rarely had sleepless nights now, and I seldom woke up depressed because Carol wasn't beside me. Kimberly visited for 4 days in March. Since we hadn't seen each other for some time, we weren't sure about our relationship. We danced around the topic of intimacy and didn't sleep together until the last 2 nights. But then it was almost as intense as our first time, only now I had protection on hand. Perhaps 4 dozen was overly optimistic. But I actually used 6 over those 2 nights. About a year later, I was told I could hire an administrative assistant for my team. Sable Security was much larger than my old company. While Zaba had 1 team dedicated to cybersecurity, we had 6. And over that year, I'd gone from being a simple team member to team leader. Since I could choose who to hire, I immediately called Kimberly. I barely had time to explain the job before she said she wanted it. When I met her at the airport, my breath caught. As I'd predicted, she was stunning. I saw men's heads turn sharply as she exited the plane, but all she wanted was to reach me. She threw herself into my arms and kissed me with a passion that made my knees buckle. The plan was for Kimberly to stay with me until she found her own apartment. I figured it would take about a week, but the search dragged on. There was something wrong with every apartment she inspected. I didn't complain because Kimberly and I shared a bed. It is funny, during the year and a half in Jacksonville, I thought about Carol less and less. When Kimberly arrived, I stopped thinking about her altogether. However, I knew Kimberly would eventually move out, and I dreaded that day. 5 weeks later, I asked Kimberly about her apartment search, and she started crying. I was completely confused, I knew I'd made her cry, but I had no idea why. Sorry, I apologized. Did I say something wrong? Do you want me to leave? Kimberly asked timidly. Hell no, I said firmly. I'd like you to stay forever, but I know one day you'll want to leave. I just need time to prepare. I would ask you to marry me, but you are too good for me. It is not like that, Kimberly protested. I've loved you almost since the day I started working at Zaba. I would marry you in a heartbeat. This changed everything. That day we went ring shopping and started planning our wedding. Even though I feared Kimberly might eventually leave me for someone better, I was so in love with her that I had to take the risk. 6 months later, Kimberly and I got married. A year after that, Kimberly gave birth to a little boy we named Mikey Jr. A year and a half later, we had a little girl named Charlotte. I'd been promoted at Sable to the point where I now led all 8 cybersecurity teams. Yes, we'd added 2 more. Kimberly, meanwhile, chose to be a stay-at-home mom. It was nearly Christmas 3 years later when I was called to a meeting. There I learned that Sable was planning to acquire Zaba security software. I would be part of the team conducting due diligence before the acquisition. During our marriage, Kimberly's mother had died, and my parents had retired and moved to Jacksonville to be closer to their grandchildren and me. With them as babysitters, I planned to use the week's assignment as a mini vacation. I would also use Kimberly's administrative skills to assist me in my investigation. That way, I could take her to work with me every day, where she could meet some of her former colleagues, and we could sneak away for long lunches together. I learned 4 things during my week in Nashville. First, this facility was the only place where Zaba conducted its cybersecurity work. Second, Jacob had been named Chief Operating Officer, and Carol was the Senior Project Manager. Third, despite my animosity toward Jacob, I found he ran a tight ship. His entire operation was first class from my perspective. Fourth, Zaba was having a Christmas party on Friday night, and I had to attend. Other than our team's initial introduction to Jacob, I had no contact with him. I didn't see Carol once all week. However, at the Christmas party, everything changed. Zaba held their party in a ballroom at the Hilton Doubletree downtown. It was festively decorated with tables around the perimeter of the dance floor. A 5-piece band played soft Christmas carols and background music in one corner, occasionally mixing in older songs. After dinner and speeches, there would be dancing. There was also an open bar, which attracted more attention as more people arrived. Jacob, Carol, and some senior Zaba leaders decided to welcome the Sable team. I wasn't looking forward to facing Jacob and Carol together, but my fears were unfounded. Jacob looked about the same, and Carol, though slightly older, still looked good. Strangely, I felt nothing when they approached. Mike, I am glad you could join us tonight, Jacob said nervously. I hope our past differences won't interfere with the acquisition. Not for me, I assured him. It is ancient history. And who is this vision of beauty? Jacob smiled widely and took Kimberly's hand. This is my beloved wife, Kimberly, I said, kissing her cheek. Jacob's smile fell as he looked at Kimberly, then at me. Kimberly smirked at him. Don't you remember me, Jacob? I was Michael's administrative assistant when he worked for Zaba, but I traded that to become Michael's wife, a huge promotion for me. Jacob's eyes narrowed further, though he tried to put on a smile that didn't seem sincere. Of course, it was so long ago. I am sorry I didn't recognize you. Jacob moved on, but his eyes kept drifting back to Kimberly and me. Then Carol slid next to me. Michael, you look really good, she said, taking my hand. And your wife is gorgeous. I didn't know you got married. We've been married for almost 7 years, Kimberly said with a smile, hugging my arm. Both you and Jacob look good, I replied, then asked, how is your daughter doing? Carol cringed at first, but then smiled. She is doing great. Tammy is in 2nd grade, and her brother Jacob Jr. is in kindergarten. Do you have kids too? Kimberly answered, Mikey Jr. is in daycare, and Charlotte is still at home with me. They're both doing well, thanks for asking. Carol moved on, and soon after, Kimberly and I found our table. The food was excellent, and thankfully the speeches were brief. Sable's CEO simply assured everyone that no jobs were in jeopardy for at least the next year, and that he looked forward to the merger. Once dinner ended, the music started in earnest, and Kimberly and I danced several times. I think young people today are missing out. Slow dancing with someone you love is so intimate, It can bond two people almost as much as physical intimacy. At some point, I felt someone tap my shoulder. When I turned, I saw Carol standing there. Kimberly turned to see what I was looking at, and her eyes narrowed when she recognized my ex-wife. Carol smiled sweetly at Kimberly. "Can I ask your husband to dance?" Kimberly looked at me, then smiled at Carol. "Just as long as you remember where to return him." I took Carol onto the dance floor, and we danced in silence for about a minute. "Michael, I want to apologize for what Jacob and I did to you back then," she said with genuine remorse. "You didn't deserve any of it. When I discovered I was pregnant with Jacob's child, I knew it was over between us. I decided to make our breakup quick and simple. I didn't even consider how much it would hurt you. I shouldn't have let Jacob talk me into that scorched earth approach. It was completely inappropriate." I chuckled slightly. "Like people say, it is water under the bridge or over the dam. It doesn't matter now. We've all moved on. Besides, I kind of deserved some of it. I really beat Jacob badly, although obviously I didn't do too much damage to his reproductive organs since you had a second child." Carol giggled at this. We danced a bit more in silence, and I decided to finally bury the hatchet between us. "Listen, Carol," I began hesitantly. "I admit I was devastated when you left me for Jacob. It took months to come to terms with losing you. But now we're both happily married with children. I've come to believe this was meant to happen." Carol suppressed a harsh laugh, and when I looked at her face, a tear ran down her cheek. "Did I say something wrong?" I asked. Carol just shook her head. "No, Michael, you didn't say anything bad. It is just not what you think. On the surface, everyone sees us as the perfect couple, and for the first year, I would have agreed. But Jacob is just a charming manipulator. He uses people and then discards them. I know he has cheated on me many times, but he is not as clever as he thinks. Every time I discover he has cheated, I cheat on him too." My jaw dropped, and Carol noticed. She grinned sadly. "It is a hell of a way to live, I know," she said. "I should have left Jacob when I discovered what he really was, but I was too ashamed and too proud. Michael, I am glad you found happiness, but I will always regret leaving you. You and my children are the best things that ever happened to me." We continued talking until the song ended. Carol then walked me back to my table and thanked Kimberly for letting her borrow me. As Kimberly and I danced our last dance that evening, it occurred to me that her advice years ago had been right. If I had refused to move on from Carol, it might well have consumed me. I think it is true what they say. When God closes a door, he opens another. When I lost Carol, I was completely devastated. But then God allowed me to find Kimberly, and I can't imagine life without her. "So what were you and Carol talking about?" Kimberly finally asked. "Is she trying to win you back?" I laughed and kissed her. "As if she has any chance of that." "Okay," Kimberly said, resting her head on my shoulder. "Just remember that I am a jealous woman who loves one man. I will cut off your. What if you ever try to leave me?" I only brought this up because I heard their marriage isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Carol told me the same thing. I agreed. But I think they'll stay together for the children's sake. After the kids are grown, I wouldn't bet on their marriage surviving. What a sad way to live. Anyway, Carol told me something I found amusing. I know she wasn't amused at all, and I am sure Jacob won't find it funny when they get home tonight. "What is it?" Carol was standing behind her husband, and he didn't realize she was there. "Jacob was looking at you and he said that I had won again." That is the end of today's story. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. A new story drops every week, right here on Blood Never Lies. See you in the next one.